so we already saw that for Plato, knowledge that we get, or let's put it this way, the information that we get through our five senses is something that he downplays in its importance. True knowledge is not of what is fleeting and changing, facts about this world, but of, general truths that have a sort of eternal existence. It's knowledge of the forms. And so at any rate, this view, the view that real knowledge should be concerned with certain truths that are perceived to be certain not by our senses but by our intellect, is a view that really comes down to the present day, although it's not that prevalent. But it resurfaced from time to time, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, with people like Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz, the rationalists of that period. But Plato kind of starts this tradition, and he gets this from Socrates. But as we said, Plato goes into he's a much more systematic thinker, and just in passing, Socrates, as far as we know, did not write anything down. Now, he was an educated man. I think he knew how to write, but he didn't. And so the dialogues that we have are, based on notes that his students took, and especially that Plato took. So now we're not going to look as much at Aristotle on the self, but a lot of the whole content of this thing is contained in this diagram, and then I kind of talk about different levels. For Plato, his view of the soul or the psyche or of our nature is that there is one truth of the matter, right? In other words, there's a form that we can describe as the form that correctly applies to human nature, and just like, say, the form of a triangle defines a triangle as a geometric object with three sides and angles. Well, Plato thinks our human nature really has three parts, and Plato's view here much more closely integrates the parts of our psyche or soul with the body than Descartes' later view that the soul or immaterial spirit is so different from the body that it gives rise to the traditional mind-body problem. The soul or spirit in man is so different from the body. How do they causally interact? We'll look at that later when we look at Descartes. So the areas of our psychological makeup roughly correspond to areas of the body for Plato. And so on the lowest level, And these are often called elements, spelled just like chemical elements, but here we're talking about 3 parts. But the way these are usually discussed and referred to is that Plato has a tripartite view of the self, and it contains 3 elements. There's the appetitive element, there's what he calls the spirited element, and then there's the rational element. And roughly, and this is a diagram I used to, in the old days, put on the blackboard. The lower part roughly corresponds to the part of our body, say, from the stomach on down, and it's the part of our psychological makeup that is concerned with and has associated desires for fulfilling our needs for food, drink, and even for sexual fulfillment, right? And so basically, this is the appetitive element. Now, each one has a virtue associated with it, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail in later slides. But the virtue that is associated with this part of our nature, in other words, for us to behave, and here you see the golden mean, moderation, is basically the virtue of self-control, not going overboard one way or another. And we'll look a little bit more at the slides that come. Now, I mentioned that Freud was influenced by Plato's 3-part soul. We know specifically in his own writings that he mentions Plato and all. But one big difference, the emotional part of us, what with Freud is kind of the id, and it's Freud's view is very kind of negative. Plato is more a glass is half full type of guy when it comes to the emotional part of us. He thinks that the spirited element, which roughly corresponds to between the neck and so the chest area, is a place where our emotions come from, but rightly understood, our emotions can produce positive characteristics like courageous behavior. Excuse me. So he's got a positive slant on this area. Now, it should not come as a surprise to you that, what he calls the rational or intellectual element is it has to do with our head area and our brain, but it's also for him the most important. And we'll see in a minute in the chariot illustration, Plato thinks that the natural order of things is that reason should rule and keep the other 2 parts in check. That is, that we should moderately control both our emotional side and the side that has to deal with the fulfillment of our basic appetites. And so Plato thinks the natural order of things is that the rational part should rule. But note, he also thinks in the whole order of the universe, the gods naturally rule over human beings, and it's reason in human beings that is a sort of godlike characteristic. The rational part of us is what will take us to be in the intellectual world, where not only the forms, the eternal truths lie, but also where good people go, and where the gods reside. So it's natural, and Aristotle picks this up from him, that the rational should rule in the whole order of things. And this was one argument that the Greeks used, and they thought it was a good one. Reason has never been seen in anything other than human form. Hence, if the gods, little g, are rational or rational beings, then they must have or exist in human form. So this is, one reason why you get, statues of the gods where the gods don't look like they do in Egyptian gods, a human body with a bird's head or a crocodile's head or something way out there. But the thought is, if the gods are rational, then they must have human form, and you could, obviously their conclusion was that the gods are rational, hence, they exist in human form. Now, they thought this was a good piece of reasoning. We can question that, but it's a background assumption that sort of underlies their tendency to portray their gods not like the Egyptians did, but in pretty much human form. That statue that you saw of Venus de Milo, is a beautiful young woman in human form, right? The head of Apollo, Apollo in that, cast looks like, a Greek, in utterly human form. So, and not surprisingly, since philosophy is the love of wisdom, basically, our rational part desires knowledge, but this is knowledge of the forms. We desire wisdom. Now, we're going to see that Plato, while he thinks that all human beings have all three elements, there are different people in society whose makeup is dominated by one or the other of these elements. And Plato thinks that this is how things ought to be. And so people who are dominated by the appetitive element tend naturally to gravitate into occupations that have to do with the fulfillment of our bodily desires. They are the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, but they're also shopkeepers and bankers, you know. And he calls this the craftsman or artisan class, right? And you know, as a class, they basically desire, you know, to pursue wealth, you know, and he doesn't think that that's a bad thing. Although, when you get to the ruling class, he does think that that's a bad thing, that rulers should be so interested in the pursuit of wealth, because even in Plato's day, he realized that rulers can be corrupted by the pursuit of wealth. Now, in the artisan class, Plato basically, in his ideal state, which is described in the Republic, he kind of leaves these people more or less alone. I mean, yes, he thinks that they should have a certain amount of moral education, but it's moral education with a sort of practical bent, enabling them to be moral merchants and to do their jobs morally. But he doesn't want to lay anything too heavy on them. So, at any rate, he more or less leaves them alone. Now, like any other military, he's more controlling of people in this class, right? And so, and by the way, I mean, even today we speak of somebody having a breast full of courage, like the chest area associated with courage, you know, that manner of speaking probably dates back to Plato. So people who are dominated by the spirited element, which is where our emotions and our aggressive impulses come from, well, he says, well, this is not a bad thing, because sometimes these people have more courage than other people in society. And so they naturally gravitate into occupations like professional soldiers or, you know, the police, you know. And, yeah, some of their desires are for power. But now Plato, we'll see, it would actually be wrong for them to want to be in the ruling class. He doesn't want military rulers. Well, who does he want? Well, we're going to see he wants, basically, in the guardian class, these are the philosopher kings. Now, it isn't like, I mean, when I went to Polytechnic, our rival school, Baltimore City College, used to pejoratively refer to us, it was an engineering, well, still is, I guess, an engineering high school, as the plumbers, you know, as a pejorative term. Yeah, really, there's nothing wrong with being a plumber, and plumbers make a whole lot more than college professors nowadays. But, you know, unless you're a real star in this. But at any rate, the comment I like to make about this is, well, it's not like, well, if Plato were a plumber instead of a philosopher, he would want plumbers to rule a just state. Well, no, I mean, he's got some reasons, right, why he thinks that a just state is best ruled by, you know, philosopher kings. Namely that, I mean, these people are dominated by the intellectual element, and it's with reason that we behold forms like moral goodness, justice, you know, and so he thinks that who is going to know better what justice is than someone who's dominated by the intellectual element and is more acquainted with justice than anyone else in the general society. But Plato Now, here's where Plato is ahead of his time. He recognizes that it's not just males who might be dominated by the intellectual element. Plato wanted candidates. Now, remember, this ideal state was never really put into practice. However, Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle was personal tutor to who? Alexander the Great, right? You know, so some of these, ideas, no doubt, came through to Alexander from Aristotle. But at any rate, to get back to this, Plato's convinced that people who excel in the intellectual element are going to have the best chance of ruling a state justly. And so what I said is he recommends what we today would call a program of standardized testing. I mean, probably all of us, took various standardized tests throughout our elementary school and, well, middle school for you all. For us, it was junior high, And he wants this testing process, among other things, to identify in the society people who are candidates for the intellectual elite, for the ruling class.
You're saying we have all three parts, but can the person that is the artisan go up to the knowledge or not?
Well, they can. I guess they can obtain knowledge of some of the forms, but they're the least likely to want to pursue philosophy in a lot of depth, I guess. But you raise an important point that I think I made last time real quickly, and it's very much against our democratic way of thinking of things. That even the son of a poor farmer or a poor lawyer from Illinois can get to be president like Lincoln. And that's that. If I'm dominated by the appetitive element, it's actually wrong for me to want to seek to be in the ruling class. Likewise, if I'm dominated by the spirited element, I shouldn't seek to be in the ruling class. And maybe it's wrong for me, instead of becoming a career soldier, to want to be a farmer or something like that. In other words, Plato does. You have almost a caste system here defined by, what areas dominate. But he thought that this testing process would single out for the guardian class. Guardians, he calls them the guardians of the state, for the ruling, and it's an elitist view, right? This is not democracy, right? These people are not voted in. They're selected out by this testing process, and they're part of the ruling elite. The rule, we use the word aristocracy to refer to a moneyed class, but there's another meaning of the word aristocracy. It actually is a form of political organization, on a level with democracy. An aristocracy is actually ruled by, a privileged elite class, And this is what Plato is arguing for. But he does think that women as well as men will be in the guardian class. But he wants them separated out at kind of around middle school age from society. And they're going to be groomed to be in the ruling class. They'll live in barracks much like soldiers do. And a lot of their lives are going to be structured, although they're going to have a time when they're going to be forced to take a menial occupation so they understand, the little guy in society and his or her needs. But and he also doesn't want them, to have much wealth because he thinks wealth corrupts. So at any rate, your book talks about Plato's view that, and Plato separates himself a little bit from this, but when we look back on it, I forget what page, but rather than stop it, we look at it as fairly naive. Plato's convinced that if someone lives an immoral life, this is a failure of education. In other words, if they knew the right things to do, they would do it. But, how many times are people, imprisoned for some sort of corruption? And they say, well, I knew what I was doing was wrong, but, I just got caught up in the whole thing, and I was cooking the books, and we go into a lot of case studies like this when I teach business ethics, but it seems like this assumption underlies this because there aren't checks and balances, on who gets into this and on their power. And another name for this class, the police soldiers, Plato calls them the auxiliary class. Now, the absolute best second-hand sale in town is the one that GBMC holds, their nearly new sale. And it supports the hospital auxiliary, right? This is a separate organization that assists and helps people, especially helps people who can't pay their bills and all, or if the hospital needs something. And they have this sale twice a year that helps support that. So the police soldier class also is called the auxiliary class, and the thought is that they will assist the guardian class in ruling. And we'll see that this is also, he portrays this in the chariot analogy, right? The little man in the chariot is what part of this? He's the one that supposedly controls everything, right? Controls the two horses, right? So he represents the rational part of us. But the two horses are a noble steed and an ignoble steed. And so the idea is that the noble horse represents the military class, and they assist the guardian class in ruling the just state. But this gives rise to the question that people ask about this, because we don't have Lockean checks and balances. Who guards the guardians? In other words, how do we keep them from, exercising too much power?
Gods.
Well, I don't know if he thought that the gods would intervene in a direct way. I mean, the reason it's raised is there's no clear answer here. In other words, he thinks he seems to be putting a lot of stock in this view to know the good is to do the good. So supposedly the people in the guardian class are more familiar with things like the form of justice than anybody else. And since their knowledge is deeper than anyone else's knowledge in society of that, and if to know the good is to do the good, then they will automatically rule a state justly and in a moral way. But, but some people aren't so sure, And so, so Plato doesn't seem to have thought that we need a lot of checks and balances, but in the real world, I think most of the time we find that we do. So this is kind of a diagram of the whole shebang, and some of the parts that follow relate back to the diagram. Again, these pages, I think, were from a different text. Soul versus body. Well, one of the things we want to see is that the attributes of the soul fit it more for the intellectual world than for this world. So the soul, resembles the divine and things in the intellectual world, right? It's where our reason and intellectual abilities are. Supposedly it's immortal. As I said, Socrates presents a number of arguments. One belief they had that I think Descartes runs with is the belief that immaterial substance does not have spatial dimensions, that the soul in some sense is like a geometric point. Remember, you can fit an infinite number of those points along a finite line because they, in theory, have no width. So if they have no width, you can squeeze an infinite number in, which, by the way, is one answer to the question that was debated in the Middle Ages and that is often brought up to show that not a lot of any worth went on then in philosophy, which is how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Well, if a pin is a material object extended in space, but angel souls, they're immaterial beings, immaterial souls, and they have no width, they're like geometric points, then one answer to that is that you can fit an infinite number of angels on the head of a pin. So, what did you learn in class today? Well, we learned that you can probably fit an infinite number of angels on the head of the pin. Really? I paid your tuition. I'm paying good money for this. But don't tell your parents what we discussed this morning or your significant other. But why do I even bring this up? Well, it has to do with this quality, right? If the soul is like a geometric point, and it's not composite, and in principle, it's not the sort of thing that can be dissolved because it doesn't have any parts it can dissolve into. Now, of course, Descartes has to give God the option of destroying a soul if he wants to because he's omnipotent. But otherwise, viewing the soul as being like a geometric point, and Socrates does talk about this conception of the soul in the Phaedo. It does give you a kind of ready-made argument for the eternal nature of the soul, right? Because just in principle, it's not the kind of thing that can dissolve and go out of existence. It's like a point in geometry. And, of course, the soul is invisible and supposedly unchangeable. And so it most resembles the divine. So the rational part of us, is the part that should rule. I should have you come up here and work your magic on this thing. I don't know. You try it. I mean, this might be one of those things where you did the right thing. It's like working on your car. You did something and now it's running right, but you don't have no idea what you did. Well, yeah, I know. There are other things. Yeah, right. We need about a 15-pound weight that we can sort of hook it on to and have it pulled out. So no, the body resembles, its qualities resemble other things in the material world, right? Now, obviously, contemporary materialists, whose main position is that matter is capable of thought, that thought is just something that comes from the activity of the material body, they would disagree with this. But for Plato, matter can't think. It's not intellectual. And of course the body is mortal, and it's composed of parts. And so the body is capable of dissolving and going out of existence, and it's obviously visible and changeable. So it's a part of, Heraclitus' world, and it most resembles the mortal, and the mortal is what should be ruled. So the idea is that our rational part should rule over the rest of our body.
So this is basically everything that Socrates said.
Well, this is Plato's more digested view, but Socrates basically held most of this. But it's Plato that formulated, and Socrates in the Republic is portrayed as the person who gets out this theory, right? But we think that by that time, Plato is putting some of his more systematized views. Socrates taught many things that were kind of the essentials of this view, but I think Plato really systematizes it into a theory of human nature, where we've got three parts in that. But, so, at any rate, note that the forms also resemble the divine. That's why they're in the intellectual world. We saw that, they're intellectually discerned. They don't dissolve. I mean, beauty itself doesn't go out of existence. Triangularity is indissoluble. But they're invisible and unchangeable. They're in Parmenides' world. Perfect and good and earthly things resemble the mortal, right? And this, you kind of take what Velasquez says about Plato's influence on Christianity with a grain of salt. There's been a real problem. Early Christianity had two heresies, ascetic and docetic Gnosticism, that are some of what the letters of Paul were about, trying to distinguish, what do you call it, Orthodox Christian views from some things that people who are influenced by Gnosticism. And both of them were considered heresies because in one way or another, they denied one of the central tenets of Christianity, which was that as one of the creeds say it, that Christ was fully God and fully man. Now, if you're not a Christian, you may not accept that, but that's a part of Orthodox Christianity. Well, ascetic Gnosticism basically said, well, Christ was morally perfect, just as the scriptures say, but he wasn't really a material. It wasn't really there in a material body. Why? Because for Plato, the material world has less existence status, but it also, being less than real, is less than good. In other words, the pronouncement that you have in the book of Genesis, that God creates the world and pronounces it good, is not something Plato would have bought into. The material world is not good. And so that made a real problem for how could Christ be morally good and sinless if he is incarnated in an evil material body, as Plato says. And so ascetic Gnosticism said, well, the incarnation didn't really happen in any literal sense. Christ was never in a real physical body, and that's why he remained sinless. And so it tended toward denial of, bodily self-denial and, asceticism, basically. That's what we call it. But then the other type of Gnosticism was much more fun, and Paul reacts against it when he says the body was made for the Lord, not for sexual immorality. The idea was, well, the tenets of Christianity have to do more with our soul, but the body is evil and it's going to do what it does, and so let's just go with the flow. So the thought was that Christ was somehow really incarnate in a material body, but wasn't as sinless as traditional Christianity portrays it. So this view that the material world is evil really didn't mix very well with Christian doctrine, in spite of the fact that people nowadays, like Velasquez, and I used this text for years here, until he priced himself out of the market. You guys are complaining about the price of this book. I mean, Velasquez's book was, several years ago, was about $130 new. I don't know what it is now, really they should allow the bookstores, they I think,
Did you say this book was?
No.
Oh my God, I was
We
gonna
use
say.
Velasquez text. That's one reason why we got away from using. In other words, all of us, if we taught intro here, in the 3 campuses, we settled on Velasquez text because it's one of the most popular. But it also, because it's so popular, law of supply and demand, it became just very pricey, and we thought, we really want to ask them. I mean, honestly, they were asking you to pay as much for a philosophy book as some of these people in the nursing program and all pay for these huge, medical texts and all. And there was a point at which we, collectively thought enough is enough. We got to go somewhere else for a text. But Augustine tried to solve the problem by putting the forms in the mind of God, and some other things. But it has not been a good mix. So at any rate, because the body is material, it actually, it is kind of imperfect and to a degree evil, or at least tending toward evil. It's where our bodily desires take us. So, well, these are just some examples, but I think you, after our talk, have a pretty good idea. The forms would be things like equality itself, beauty itself, justice itself, perfect triangularity, whereas earthly things, well, these are general characteristics. These are particular things in the world, like particular beautiful flowers versus beauty itself, particular just actions versus justice and whatever. So the way we supposedly get back in touch with some of the forms is, using our reason to, in the same way that Socrates helped the slave boy to do what he did, to try to, recollect what we at some point already knew. So we know only particular equal things, but by reason we can get back in touch with the concept of equality in and of itself. We can know only particular beautiful things. As Russell states that in his history, the ordinary person is concerned just with beautiful things, but the philosopher intellectually is concerned with beauty itself, which is known by reason. So hence this idea of reason as something that gives us an into knowledge, to true knowledge, that's even better than anything our senses can do for us. And Plato thinks that our soul longs for the forms. Now, one of the things we don't tell you when you sign up for this course is one of the lines that Socrates takes in the Phaedo, where they're discussing arguments for and against, survival of death. He says, well, really, philosophy is just a practicing for death. Because the soul longs to be apart from this evil physical body and commune with the forms again, which I hope some of you were doing last night, right? And so philosophy is, while you're in the body, trying to practice for that time, practice for death, the time, by intellectually getting in touch with the forms. But again, they're known by reason. So no things in this world, for instance, are perfectly equal. So Socrates has this argument in the Phaedo that we don't acquire a concept like perfect equality by the senses, but it's acquired when the soul is acquainted with the forms directly. But, one of the issues this raises, though, is, well, how did I acquire knowledge of some of these things if they're not discerned by the senses in the afterlife? How did that come? Is it something intuitive or what? I don't think Plato ever adequately answers that. So, well, here's that chariot image. So again, there's supposed to be two horses. I just got whatever graphic I could get there. Ideally there would be two horses pulling it, but again, reason is supposed to be the guy in the chariot who is guiding it, and the spirited element is the noble steed, and and supposedly the noble steed assists the charioteer in keeping the ignoble steed, the wild horse, in in bay, as the military class, the auxiliaries, assist the guardians, the intellectual, the guardian class in ruling a state and keeping the rabble, all those people dominated by the appetitive element in check, right? And obviously, Abraham Lincoln was, what's his famous statement? God must have loved the common people because he made so many of them. And Plato realizes that most of the people in society are going to be in the artisan class, not in the ruling class or soldiers. And by the way, he takes. I have a friend who has over the years had some champion horses, right? Jumpers and hunters over smaller fences, and when she's looking to buy a horse, she looks at bloodlines, and even in Plato's day, they knew that to get a champion horse, you need to look at bloodline and breed the best with the best. Well, now, this is something that Plato thinks should be done even for the members of the ruling class. That the testing process is going to single out not only people who need to be in the intellectual class, but the best of the best in the intellectual class. And so he wants them married to one another. Your book, I think there are supposed to be marriages hooked up, but they're arranged marriages. But here's where Plato thinks that he can morally justify the noble lie. People, if they knew that their marriage was arranged for them by the already existing rulers, might rebel against it, right? So Plato thinks that we ought to lie to members of this class and tell them that their spouse was selected by lottery, when in fact he was trying to breed the best with the best, right? But he thinks that, I guess for the greater good of the state, this lie is justified. And of course, this is a topic that comes down to the present day. I mean, to what extent can we justify, a lie if we think it serves the greater good,
So that's maybe where Hitler got his bad idea.
Pardon?
Maybe that's where Hitler got his bad idea.
Well, maybe so. I mean, certainly, you could justify a lot of things if you want to go as far in that direction as he did. Yeah, and could certainly justify lying if you justify genocide. But yeah. So at any rate, this idea of whether a lie, an official lie, is justified if it serves the greater good, is something that we even have in our own, discussions. I mean, did they know? Did the current administration know that nobody was ever going to save $2,500 on health care? That people wouldn't really be able to keep their own positions, but thought it was for the greater good of society that this law be passed, and it was worth telling some lies if that brought about the end result. I don't know, but that is one line where people discuss this even in the present day. Or look at the NSA, are they justified in lying to goes, oh, all we're doing is collecting metadata, and really, they're collecting every single conversation you ever made. Which I mean, my feeling is, I mean, if the NSA wanted to get back some of the favorites lost for the public, they ought to make some services available. Like I lost the physical cell phone, but somewhere, they ought to be able to, download, some of my contacts and all. You just call the NSA up, or say, I mean, man, my hard drive crashed, have you guys, back up my computer files somewhere in the cloud, can you download them? I did have, I don't, I had a friend who had good luck with Acer, so I bought one, but I had it for 6 months this past summer and had a catastrophic hard drive failure. They replaced it for free, but I had to send it all the way to Texas and wait 3 weeks to get back, 2 to 3 weeks. So at any rate, the thought is then that the natural order of things is for the rational part of us to rule over the other elements. And the justice, for an individual to be just, for Plato, justice is not a, let me go back to the beginning here. No, the different parts have virtues associated with them: self-control with the appetitive element, courage with the aggressive or spirited element, and wisdom with the intellectual or rational element. But justice, what makes for a just human being, is that all of this stuff is coordinated in the person. That basically these two elements are doing what they should do, but reason is ruling over the human being to keep the other two elements in check. And likewise, for Plato, in a just political state, the ruling class should rule assisted by the police soldiers, but every element of society should be doing their thing. But the class dominated by the intellectual element, though, should naturally rule and should keep other elements of society in check. And when that happens, Plato thinks that's when we get a just state. Now, Aristotle doesn't have any one political view. He thinks, that a just society can be any society that fosters the happiness of people in society. But at any rate, so hence, if reason rules, then we have a just person. And Plato does, and Socrates thinks that will fare better in the afterlife. In this chariot analogy, and it goes by quickly in the video, but he says that those who pursue knowledge of the forms and wisdom, their chariots rise up. So in the afterlife, there's much more of a chance that they'll be in the intellectual realm with other good people and the gods and the forms, communing with the forms. Whereas people who are too dominated by their lower nature are too wedded to this world, and Plato says their chariots get kind of drawn back and they fall back to earth. And now, folks, I'm not making this up. This is really at the end of the Phaedo. He says that these are the kind of people that you see wandering around graveyards as disembodied spirits because their chariots have been drawn back to the earth, you know. So you got that going for you, you know. Another positive reason to take philosophy, that there's less of a chance in the afterlife that you will wind up as a disembodied spirit wandering around in graveyards, you know, if you learn to really commune with the forms. Hey, and that's not me, that's Plato talking there. As the saying goes, you can't make this kind of stuff up. Now remember, Plato also talks about Atlantis. So, so I mean, there's a byproduct of studying philosophy. So when reason rules over the spirited element, we learn to moderate our aggression and anger. And here you also see this view of the golden mean, that the right way for us to act is a kind of center, because Plato here, when he talks about temperance, self-control, he's not preaching asceticism. He's not saying we should be denying the needs of the body because the body's evil. No, he's saying that we shouldn't let ourselves be too carried away by the desires of the body. We need to regulate them by our reason and keep them in check. So reason, when it rules over the appetitive element, helps us to moderate our desires for food, drink, and sex. So you can have sex, but you don't want to be a sex addict, right? Or a glutton or an alcoholic. And it's reason that allows us to keep these in check. So reason then produces these virtues. In other words, when reason helps us to control our aggression, but also our fear, we get courage developed. Or, temperance is another name for self-control. So the virtue of temperance is produced when reason reigns over the bodily appetites. So Plato and Aristotle after him are much more concerned with virtuous character traits when they're talking about ethical things, rather than some decision procedures for how do I figure out what's the morally right thing to do in this situation. Whereas the bulk of modern ethical theories tend away from virtue ethics toward what are called theories of obligation, theories of how I work out what's the right thing to do in this situation. Like, should we allow this person, who some people say is brain dead, to continue on a respirator? What's the right thing to do there? But one of the things that I think Velasquez points out in the video is, not in this video, but in another one in this series, is that the most pressing issues we tend to deal with ethically are the ones where we've got a decision to make, and what is the right thing to do here, But we do talk about, and virtue ethics has made a real comeback, in the last, say, 20 or 30 years, So we'll look a little bit at that after the test. So remember, Plato's claim is that the state is the individual written large. In other words, the structure of an ideal political state mirrors the structure of, or the psychological makeup, the threefold psychological makeup of a human being. So Plato's really narrow in this, right? I mean, his view says there's only one structure for a just political state. And Aristotle differs with him. He thinks that you can have more than one form of government, but a just political state has the happiness and interests of its, of the people in that state at the forefront. So just as the three elements with reason ruling ought to rule over, a just person and people lead a balanced life. So we've already made this point, in a just political state, you need all three classes in society working together harmoniously with the guardian class ruling things. So this is Plato's view. And there again, this is the point I make in a slide, but our chariots are pulled back to earth if reason fails to rule, if we allow ourselves to be too dominated by the other elements, and our souls become polluted. They're ruled by bodily desires, and they see truth as only what the senses can experience, and our polluted souls may end up prowling tombs and sepulchres after death. And he actually, Socrates actually speculates about this at the end of the Phaedo. I didn't make this up, folks. So anyway, so this is going to be a good time to take a break. Let's take a break for about a quarter of it. It's about 26 after, and then we'll. I think I'll pass out, the stuff having to do with the test, and we'll do a little review. I think what I may have you do is to look at the sample questions and fill them out, and then maybe we'll discuss them and go through the review sheet a little bit. Okay, but let's take a little bit of a break. Is that your?
Yeah, that's mine. Do you want that after what I'm doing?
Well,
Yeah, I know
I
what
don't.
I'm doing.
But I mean, have you picked out a song or a film?
It's going to be a video on YouTube.
Okay.
Of,
Okay.
You know how when
Okay.
passes.
Oh, right.
passes
I
away.
see YouTube there. Okay.
Is that okay?
Well, yeah, I guess so. One of the things I ask people to do is not do a documentary. Is it more like a documentary? In other words, say a frontline documentary on capital punishment
No.
is
It's
obviously
actually
about capital punishment.
an experience, a personal experience is that he passed away,
Uh-huh.
saw the light,
Oh,
and
okay.
came back to be able to tell
Okay,
everyone
that
about
would be
it.
fine.
That'd be fine?
That would be fine. Why don't you hold on to it?
Okay.
Because I may, it may get misplaced.
Okey-doke.
That'll be good. Have you ever heard of the book Life
This is
After
Carol?
Life? Oh, go ahead.
Good, how are you?
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, if you don't have one, I pass out. Yeah. Go down.
Okay, it is on okay. What she did is she put it on the official letterhead. Is that okay? We can fax that to you? Oh, so I need official transcript. No problem. No problem. That's be perfect. No, give it to me. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. 5795. Okie dokie. I'll have it faxed over. Okay. Now I am currently in the history class and the psych class, and that doesn't matter. I'll just bring them with me. Okay. So once you get the transcript, what's next? Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Did I not do that already? Did I not do that already, or that was just so welcoming? Okay. Awesome. So when does, looking at the schedule, when does the cohort actually start? I have here the number 264. Does that? Righty. Okay, I shall fax you that grade for the English, and then these other grades will just come with me when I come. Alrighty. Bye.
folks, if somebody hasn't mentioned it already, I just went down the elevator on the first floor, and the office next to the elevator, nobody's in it. And it looks like a pipe burst, and there is like, half inch of water on the floor, and it's hot water. And all these maintenance people are heading over there now, so they may not even allow you to take the elevator down, but I would maybe plan on not being able to take the elevator, just go down the stairs. But they really have a problem. Folks, I'm going to give some of these out. Let's say I was trying to multitask, and while I was running off some sets of these, I was in another part, and I forgot to check, because I was in a hurry, whether there was enough paper in, and there wasn't. So when I did it the second time, for whatever reason, it did not staple them. Well, hold on, I guess we can. So some of these have staples, some of them don't. Let me get out the stapled ones, but I think some folks will have unstapled ones. But so anyway, wait till folks come back. But you might look at some of the sample questions on the last page. Are there 4 people in this one?
Not one or two.
Okay. Well, I have enough of them. It's just that some of them, not all of them, have staples. Here's wait a second. All right, that's part of the original. Okay, this is the copy. So here's another copy of it. But if you want- There are 4 pages and 2 sheets, but ladder through.
It's gonna be like 10 times harder for me to get all the press and take it. 10 times harder than the big press. Sorry, that's stupid.
These are the essay questions?
So I have some things on the review sheet to kind of clue you in on the main points, but you need to think of the question pool as kind of doing the same thing as well. But what you might want to do is on the very last page is a sheet of sample questions, which I only do for the first pass, but these cover ancient philosophy, but not every part. The one on 7, well, it's so simple you might, but it'll give you an idea of some of the types of objective questions I would answer. So, maybe take 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes, and try your hand at the sample questions, and then we'll go over them, and I'll make a few comments about the types of questions I might have on. So it can take a few minutes and go over the sample questions on that side.
Professor,
Uh-huh.
so are these the questions that are on the blackboard?
Yeah. It's what's under sample questions in Blackboard. Yeah.
And we just pick one for the.
I'm sorry. You're asking about the essay questions.
Yes.
Yeah, you just pick one of those.
Okay.
Okay. So for the question pool, you just do one of those, 1.5 to 3 pages, type double space. But on the last page, there are some objective, true, false, multiple choice questions, and that's what I was saying. You might want to go over those and try to answer them, and then see where you. need some more, a little more time. Or can get maybe a few people need a few more minutes. So I'll give it a few more minutes so we can kind of go over these. I do this on the first test because it gives you an idea of how I would ask an objective question on a philosophy test. You know. Well, why don't we go over it? What did?
Sorry. My father-in-law's passing away, so.
Oh my!
Yeah.
Oh wow! Sorry. On number one, how many thought it was A? Or that B? How about C? Okay, well, yeah, this one it was C. On number two, was the apeiron like A, Earth, B, air, C, fire, or D, none of the above? Yeah, more hands for, yeah, none of the above is the answer, right? It was different from any of these. So note, you want to make sure, and especially on ones like 3, that some of them may have an all the above or none of the above option at the end, because 3 was ultimate reality, fleeting and changeable for Heraclitus. Yeah. But was it like the flow of a river? Well, how many say yes? Yeah, I mean, he gives that example. An ever-living fire. Yeah, he also uses the if you know it's A, you don't want to be too quick to go to the next question. You want to look at all the options because you might have one, like 3, where the correct option is what? I mean, it's D, all of the above. And of course, if you're pretty sure that you know it's 2 of the 3 options, then assume that it is all the above, right? And by the way, something that I learned early on, and I've had people say that psychologists dispute this, but it really does seem to be that more often than not, your first choice is the right one. I probably see 2 or 3 examples of right answers changed to wrong answers for every one case where somebody changes the wrong answer to a right one. So unless you're pretty sure that you made a careless error, or you forgot something and now you remember and now it's really clear to you what the right answer is, you might be better to go with your original, with your first impression. Okay. So, and for whatever reason, I don't have an example of it, but sometimes I will have a question where the A option is one thing, the B option is another, and then for C and D, I'll put both A and B, or neither A nor B. Occasionally you'll see one like that. well, okay. Number 4, Parmenides based his views concerning the ultimate nature of being with a capital B on arguments derived from careful observations of the world. I mean, had A. Okay, somebody had A. B, experiments made in his own laboratory. No, it's not B. In fact, one of the people in the video calls what these pre-Socratics were doing science, but armchair science. In other words, you have to go maybe more than 1,000 years, more like 1,500, into the future to get the idea that what science ought to be about is advancing theories, but then testing them experimentally and observationally to, confirm or disconfirm them. In other words, these guys would get out a theory, and it was enough for them to get out one that they thought tied all the loose ends together, all the data points, as it were. But the idea of then going on to test their theory in a laboratory or something just didn't, that doesn't come till much later. Okay. So what about C for number 4, a priori arguments not based on sense experience? Yeah, I see some hands. And that's a, well, and it can't be D. It can't be all the above. So, yeah, it's a priori arguments. So 5, you cannot step twice in the same river. So sometimes there'll be some questions revolving around a claim a philosopher made that is talked about in the PowerPoints or in the book. Was said by Empedocles. Okay. What about B? Heraclitus? Yeah. Yeah. So Heraclitus is what is most famous for, not C or D. 6, for Parmenides, the fact that nothing can come into or go out of existence shows that there can be no A toothfairy. Right? In other words, the tooth goes out of existence and money appears. But if things can't go out of existence, there can't be a tooth fairy. That's what I did. Water, right? For B. What about C? Change. Yeah. Now it happens that there are a lot of C's option here. That my tests tend to vary in which one occurs more. Remember, I said when I taught a lot at Hartford Community College, we had off-campus, a whole off-campus facility at Aberdeen Proving Ground, and the people, and if you're ex-military, you already know this. I mean, the people in the military, their rule of thumb was, when in doubt, Charlie out. In other words, somehow they thought that on Army tests, the option was more likely to be C than any other possible option. So if you weren't sure of a question, if you went with C, you had a better chance of getting it right. I don't know if that's the case on mine, but it is on this practice test. Pardon. So yeah. So what I'm saying is, even though a number of these are ones where C is the correct answer, it may not be that way on the actual test. It sort of varies, and there's no rhyme or reason. Now, we didn't really look through the apology. We did the year I did this in spring 2012, but you can probably answer this one whether we went through it or not, right? Socrates argues what? The unexamined life is not worth living. Wisdom through philosophy is to be attained only after one finds wealth. Inner goodness is impossible since everyone's selfish. For confidence in our wisdom is the true goal of philosophy. Which do you think it is?
C.
Okay. Somebody thinks it's C, but now that view is discussed in Plato. The view you see it in C, but Plato rejects it. It's called egoism. But yeah, it's A. The unexamined life is not worth living. But at another place in the Republic, they deal with another kind of cynical view of morality that everyone, just by their very makeup, has to act selfishly. And Plato thought, in fact, what we went over today gives you the answer to why Plato thought we weren't determined just to be ruled by our own self-interested desires. And the thought is that the philosopher or the good person can rise above, their selfish or self-interested desires. So we're not forced to act selfishly, but there is a view that says that we must. That not only, it's called psychological egoism, that we're psychologically built so that we can only be motivated to do something if we see something in it for us. There's an option on the paper, to discuss that, and it's discussed in your text. But that's one view that we hit in ethics, and sometimes I cover it in intro. We won't look at it this time. Usually there are going to be more multiple choice than any other type of question, but there probably will be at least 5 true or false, and number 8 and 9, and of course on the Scantron, and most of you, maybe all of you already know that, but on a Scantron form, A is true, B is false, and it even says it on the form, So, Anaximander did not think that the ultimate stuff was either earth, air, fire, or water. Well, it's a pretty easy question, right? It covers the same ground as 2. And, so is that true or false? It's true, right? Because he says it's none of these 4. It's basically something more basic, a pyrrhon, right? 9, if we accept the arguments of Parmenides, change would be a mere illusion. That's also true, yeah. In other words, he knows that we commonsensically believe that change really happens. But his answer is to what our senses tell us is that it's just an illusion. That he's got a more fundamental argument that shows that it doesn't happen. So, don't believe your own lying eyes, believe the argument. Right? But it shows, again, in Parmenides, the preeminence of reason and the idea of trusting a rational argument, even if its conclusion seems to be something that conflicts with what your senses tell you. So, what about now? There was a time when I did not do a separate review sheet, but only a question poll, and I would tell people the kinds of things about which I would ask an essay question are also the kinds of things that deal with points that I would ask objective questions around. So you want to also look at the questions you do not do. And again, the assignment for the question pool is to just do one of these, okay? Preferably 1.5 to 3 pages. So since we postponed the test till Tuesday, it's due on Tuesday. Hopefully that's not going to place a burden. I mean, the whole thing is kind of condensed. I answered somebody's question, if you can't type it all up in time, I'd rather have a handwritten copy in on time than than a late copy. I don't like deducting 10 points for lateness, but it is in there. So it'll be due Tuesday. And is there anyone who, well, let me do a little bit of the review, unless there's a specific question. I mean, I don't know how much longer. Well, we'll go for a while. We, on Monday, we'll spend some time on review, but we'll also go into the next material. But basically, I'm going to cut off the stuff for test 1 with what we did today. So any new material we cover Monday will be basically something that I'll test you on at the final. Again, try to remember number 2 pencil if you want to make sure that you have a good one. But I'll, unless I forget, I'll bring some with me, and I will have the Scantron forms, so you won't need to worry about all that. And like I say, these are the Scantron forms are the ones that they provide me with. And I guess they use them for some other tasks, but they're these huge forms that will take up to 200 questions, So I'm trying to debate, rather than give you 25 questions, if I ought to give you 200 instead. Would that be fairer?
That's unfair.
It would have, better.
How many questions?
No, it probably will be 25 for 2 points each. But like I say, I'm using the forms that they will provide me for free. And for some reason, the English department who buys them, I know it's English or speech, but whoever buys them over there buys only these huge, long ones. And I try to sneak some out of. See, we used to be part of behavioral sciences, and then they moved us over to liberal arts, where we ought to be. But the secretary down there doesn't want to part with them because she knows we're not part of, the report. See, I'm a pragmatist. I figure however you get them, And also, I mean, it's the same state budget. Anyway, okay. See, as somebody dominated by his rational element, I have the ability easily to rationalize this sort of thing. Right. What I needed. Oh, it's bad. At Compton, I have to ask these people to buy their own Scantron forms at the bookstore for 43 cents a piece plus tax. And I always am apologetic about it. I said, but guys, we don't have it in our budget. I mean, sometimes historically black colleges just don't get, the kind of money that other
My
places.
friend at Towson, she forgot to buy the Scantron at the bookstore, and her class was 8 a.m. and I think it opened at like 8:30, and then she failed the test because she didn't have a Scantron. Didn't buy the Scantron.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, Well, the bookstore,
But
right.
my class at Towson, though, they provided.
We've got a building like right next to us, and I'm in a building that's right next to the building with a bookstore. So I have sent some people down there, but usually they're back in time. And what we will do, by the way, is for a 3-hour class, I feel like I have to do a lecture component too. You know, if it were a 50-minute class or even an hour and 20-minute class, the only thing we do is the test, and whenever anybody finished, they would be finished. In fact, that is what we're going to do on the last class for the final. If you're finished in 30 minutes, you're finished, you know. But I kind of feel like for mid-semester, so what we'll do is I'll set a time, maybe an hour from the start or whatever, where we'll meet back, and you'll basically take your break when you turn in your test form. Because some people will be finished in 25 minutes, and other people might take 40, you know. And by the way, it's not always, sometimes it's the A students who are still there after 40 or 45 minutes,
Yes, I
you
do
know.
everything.
I mean, you know, the kinds of people who leave really early fit into two opposite categories. They're either the people who know it's so cold that they, you know, they've written it out in 15 or 20 minutes and they're going to get an A, or the kind of people who don't have a clue, you know.
So why waste time?
But I think most of you are not going to fit in the latter category. But at any rate, so we'll only take part of Tuesday to do the test, and it'll be at the beginning, because if you're like I was in college, I mean, you're not going to be able to focus on anything. You will not hear a word I say, you know, because you're thinking about the test. So we got to do the test. Plus, if you were like me in college, you know, being a little neurotic, you're worried that some of that knowledge is going to leak out if we don't get to the test right now, you know? So, right. Whether that's a rational fear or not, you know, most of us have it. So we will do the test at the very beginning, you know. Well, why don't we start doing a little review, and maybe we'll do some more next time. But go on in the syllabus. What do we have? Aristotle's Ethics next time, or well, we have the 4 becauses, Aristotle's view of causation, which I do not have a PowerPoint on. So remember, we're not doing the test next time, but we'll look at Aristotle on causation. But we may also, since what I have for Monday assumed that part of the period would be taken up with the test, also for Monday, look some at Aristotle's Ethics, and that there is a PowerPoint on that, because we will look at that. And this is one branch of ethics that has become has sort of had a resurgence of interest. And frankly, I don't think that ethics is an either-or proposition. Either we stick with an ethical theory that tries to tell us how to work out what's the right thing to do, what's called a theory of obligation, or we look at a theory like virtue ethics that focuses less on how we figure out the right thing to do, and more on what kind of person ought we to be a moral, just person. What kind of character traits make for a just person. But I don't think it's one or the other, you know, but I think it's both. But we'll at least look at that as one example of something, a part of the discussion in ethics. So Thales, again, we said, is like the first Western philosopher. You know, one of the things that you need to do is to review them, and it's easy to get them confused. Who said what? You know, because you know, you're bombarded with all this information, and then, you know, sometimes in the heat of the test. That's why you need to kind of think about the options. But we knew that he thought, in other words, his solution to the problem of the one and the many is what? That reality is ultimately one, right? One kind of stuff. And what's the stuff? Water, right? Do you recall? I have a slide, and it's in your book. But what did Aristotle give as a reason why he thought Thales chose water?
Because water, everything needs water.
Yeah, everything needs water to live. You know, but you know, another reason is that it takes many forms. You know, we know a solid, liquid, and gaseous, and those people working on that puddle of water. I'm serious. I stepped out of the elevator down there. If you didn't go down there, and the whole hallway is filled with not just water, but hot water. It must have been a hot water pipe that burst. So yeah, he thought that water was primordial stuff. All things are full of gods. Well, here, you know, we have like two views. One view is that this may indicate that he hasn't totally broken away from the mythological view of looking at things, and still wants to put gods in things. As I said, that was the way I interpreted him for years, as having a kind of primitive animism, you know, where everything is inhabited by spirits, either good or evil. But another way, and you find this in the slides, and I don't know how much your book discusses this, but by saying all things are full of gods, he may have also said that that the causal principle that explains why things happen is internal in things. You don't need an external causal agent like a god. That what causes things in nature to do the things they do is a principle within them. You know, so that's two opposite views. You know, but if I ask you a question on that, I think it'll be pretty clear what I'm asking. Well, the philosophical problem that the pre-Socratics focus on, again, was this perennial problem of the one and the many. You know, is ultimate reality irreducibly many different kinds of things, or is it one? And does anything general exist? You know, Plato's solution, of course, is that ultimate reality is many at the level of individual particular things, but that it's one if you talk about the form that those are subsumed under. You know, so Plato has the oneness occurring in the intellectual world and the many in this world. So they focus on the problem of the one and the many, and of course many of them thought that they could could do better than the four element theory, which seemed to have been around. Certainly, people like Russell in his History of Philosophy seems to discuss things as if these people knew that the four element theory was there, but thought they could do better. You know, in other words, if you're the things are more than just earth, air, fire, and water. That, you know, Thales is saying it's all water, you know, the other things. And we didn't discuss Anaximenes, but he said everything was air, and he thought you got the other elements by condensing air, or by evaporating it. You know, fire is extremely thin air, which, if you think about it, I mean, when we heat air with a fire, the atoms are farther apart, and it is thinner, you know. But Anaximenes, which we didn't really discuss, thought everything was air, but he could show how everything is air. It was just various levels of density of air, you know. So if you condense air to a certain degree, air becomes water. If you condense it even more, it becomes earth. You know, when you think about it, I mean, you know, you can have condensed chemicals that go into a liquid state or a solid state. Remember that old physics experiment? I don't think I ever saw it done, but you take, what is it? Is it water that you compress it in a piston with? I forget, but the thing was you'd I think it was water that they put into a piston that was very tight, and you hit it with a hammer, and the thing would freeze, you know, because of the action of the compression. But that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about. So let's get to it. You know, so I mean, he's not. But at any rate, Anaximander, though, Anaximander is the pupil of Thales, and while we didn't discuss him, Anaximenes was a pupil of Anaximander. But Anaximander thinks that stuff can't be one of the original four. I like to call them the Big Four, although nobody else does, so don't call them the Big Four. But so why Anaximander needs something more basic than the received four elements for his primordial stuff? Why does it?
Because the four elements are so different that they couldn't change each other, so it can't be anything. Right. He doesn't think that you know they can change into one another, and any other reasons that he gives. I mean, that's certainly one of the main ones. Well, also they're paired as opposites, and opposites tend to cancel each other out rather than change into one another. And he thinks because of this factor, if there were one element that were dominant, that it would just take over. So if Thales were right and everything were water, everything would be in a liquid state, you know. So he looks for something more basic. And what's the Greek word he uses for this? Yeah, very close. The apeiron, which is we translate boundless, indefinite, indeterminate. Now, there was an interesting point
or a point I often make here, because this, and the reason I didn't make it is because it transitions into Anaximenes, who's back to the big four. But not everyone accepted this solution because it's kind of deep and dark and mysterious, right? The apeiron is not something our senses put us in touch with, but it's more basic than anything they put us in touch with. And if you make a claim like the basic substance is the apeiron, well, one way you can go with that, let's suppose you and I can't quite get a handle on just what the apeiron would be. Well, one way of looking at it is that that's just too deep a concept for most of our puny brains to get a handle on, to get our mind around what is the apeiron. But one of the things that Richard Rorty in the 20th century said is one reaction to somebody making a claim like that in philosophy is that the concept is very deep and beyond, what we can tell with our reason. Or another opposite reaction is that the concept is empty. That even the people who use it may not have a clear idea of what they mean by it. And this was part of the basis of David Hume's skepticism. He thought many philosophers were using concepts like immaterial substance or material substance as an I don't know what that underlies and supports sensible qualities, and that they may not have a clear idea of what it is. In other words, that some of these concepts are empty rather than deep. So two opposite ways you can react to somebody who makes a claim like the ultimate primordial stuff is the apeiron, the boundless, indefinite, homogeneous substance. But how do the we gave you, well, there are sort of two different stories on how the elements get separated out from the boundless indefinite, right? Well, what does your book say? You guys haven't memorized the whole thing? Well, basically, the claim made in the book is that some sort of something akin to an explosion or some dramatic event is responsible for separating out the elements. The slides were based on a different discussion, and I like its view that he thought that the whole universe was in motion, and that the motion of the universe separates things out in a natural kind of order of things, so that the lightest things are at the edge in the fiery outer layer, and then you have a layer, of air, which is the next lightest thing, and then you have water, and finally at the center of the universe you have Earth. And this, by the way, is what lies at the heart of Aristotle's notion of place. Some people might say, well, he's just referring to gravity when he talks about place. But later, I know I'm getting on a tangent, but later philosophers of science like Thomas Kuhn said, look, when one theory replaces another, they're often incommensurable, that you can't explain what goes on in one theory by referring to terms and concepts used in another. And Aristotle's notion of place is very much in line with the view of the universe that you get in Anaximander and really in Ptolemaic astronomy. In other words, why does this chalk, which is made of matter, fall when I let go of it rather than just float away? Well, Aristotle's answer is that the proper place for heavy things like Earth and this chalk is down towards the center of the Earth, so it's just seeking its proper place, you know, whereas the smoke from the fire is seeking its proper place toward the heavens, you know, so it's going up. Well, that's very different from the Newtonian concept of gravity, you know. It's an entirely different explanation of why the chalk falls, you know, and the point Kuhn was trying to make is that you can't explain the concepts of one theory in terms of another, that, you know, the notion of place is not a primitive notion of gravity. But then other people kind of disagree, so there's a debate about this, but that's part of what Kuhn meant by saying that scientific theories are incommensurable, that you can't combine them, that one just replaces another. Well, at any rate, but note how that is in line with the view of the universe that you get there from Anaximander, that the heavier elements are at the center, where the Earth is, at the center of the universe, you know, and so another story is that the elements get separated out, much like things would get separated out in a centrifuge, you know. And of course, this is a way how when we're really pressed for time at the end of the semester, you know, this is how we professors sometimes, you know, grade essays, right? You know, the gravity method, where you know, you take the essays, stand at the top of the stairs, and throw them down, and you know, the A papers that are heavier because people have said more and they fly farther, you know, they're the ones that fly the farthest, and you know, the C and D papers are the ones that fall at your feet, and then the B's and C's are somewhere in between, you know. They fly, but not as far as the A papers. Well, the thought is, in a centrifuge, you know, things get separated out by density, right? And so this is the story that that they think underlies his claim that how separate, in other words, the separate elements come out of the apeiron because the whole of the universe is in motion, and they get separated out by the motion of the universe. That's what we mean by the vortex, you know. Not the funnel, that's just a way of representing it graphically, but you know, notice if you look at the night sky, it does seem like everything is going round us, that we are the center of the universe and everything is going around. Okay, well, so the features of the boundless, it's homogeneous, but it's also indefinite and eternal in its existence. Features of the world which separates out the elements. well, here again, I think it's the constant motion of the Earth. But your book says it might have been a catastrophic event, you know, like an explosion that separated them out. And honestly, you know, this is an area where experts who've written on this topic disagree, you know. But I hope I'll make it, you know, it'll be obvious what is the correct answer with that. Do we want to? So what are the stars? Well, they're basically. I mean, he says that there's a covering over the Earth that separates the layer of air from the fiery outer layer, but the covering has holes in it. And this is literally what happens in a planetarium, right? The stars are essentially pinholes, and there's light behind it, and it shines through. You know, at least the old-fashioned kind of planetarium. There may be more high-tech planetariums that work on a different way. But so the thought was that the stars were, you were looking at some of the fiery outer layer. But in the fiery outer layer was where eternal things existed, like the gods, you know. So it's the realm of the gods. Well, for Heraclitus, so Anaximenes, you can say, well, why did he go back to one of the big four, not water but air? Well, again, he thought that the concept of the apeiron was just too deep and mysterious to work with. And so, as a pupil of Anaximander, he thought, well, we need to get back to something that our senses can put us in touch with. I have a way of explaining how the other elements can be formed out of air, and it has to do with their being condensed or evaporated. Excuse me. You know, and there are other pre-Socratics like Pythagoras, who we could have discussed, Empedocles, but I thought we want to just, you know, focus at least on some of the main ones. And Heraclitus and Parmenides have been very influential. We saw their influence on Plato, but also on later rationalists for Parmenides. And Heraclitus, I mean, people who are influenced by things like Marx's dialectical materialism, that the view that everything progresses, that matter progresses toward an ultimate state, which for Marx was ultimate communism, was that this happens dialectically. And the point is that this idea that everything is constantly progressing toward a goal is in part influenced by Heraclitus and his thinking. You know, Hegel and Marx were both influenced by Heraclitus in the 19th century. So, you know, the views of these philosophers resurface at different times, you know. So what did Heraclitus mean by saying that we can't step in the same river twice? Well, pretty obvious, right? Yeah, the waters are constantly changing. So no matter how fast you do it, you know, there are going to be different different waters. And I think your book goes so far as to say you may have changed as well. But most people at least stick with the fact that you know, the waters progressed. Well, let's go through Heraclitus, and then we'll look at Parmenides and some of these other things next time. We'll finish up since it's Thor's Day, a day on which we honor Thor. No, that really is the source of the name. You know, we can honor Thor by what did can a river be taken in more than one sense? Well, again, if you're talking about the waters, they're in constant flow. But remember, he's got this underlying unity. You know, you want to associate especially the Logos with Heraclitus. He's the one who especially uses that term. Now, your book uses it more broadly for a rational, unifying principle under things. But, you know, the idea is there's a unity produced by the tension of the river, the waters that want to flow, like the waters that wanted to flow within the confines of the pipe downstairs, now are everywhere because they're out of the confines of the pipe, right? You know, so he did think that we can talk about the same river in the sense of, you know, it's an object where there's an underlying unity produced by the tension of the banks of the river holding in the water. So the water wants to flow out of it, and, you know, the banks hold it in and give it its identity as one in the same river, you know. So that's so you can mean either the waters or, you know, the whole thing that's determined by the banks. Give some examples he used to illustrate the principle of oneness and difference. Well, you know, you can go back and they're in the slides. Now remember, you can print out, if you don't want to print out the whole thing, look at the outline mode, and you can print out the contents of these things on just a couple of pages, you know. If you print it out in outline mode, all it's going to do is print out the text, you know. So at any rate, there are things like, do you recall any of them? Again, it doesn't. A lot of them had to do with attention of opposites. I mean, or like a pen can write a straight or crooked line. A road can go up or it can go down in two opposite directions. The same road can be a road going up a mountain or down a mountain. And again, we look at this and they don't seem very deep insights, but these ancient Greeks seem to be really fascinated by the idea of opposites and by concepts like, wow, the same thing can have two opposite qualities embodied in it. You know, the same water can be healthy for us and unhealthy for, or I'm sorry, the other way around, healthy for fish and unhealthy for us. You know, and so, you know, and so these are some examples he uses, but also he, you know, so this illustrates, so the logos was the word that it was used for this principle of oneness in difference. and the significance of strife is that you often have a strife of opposites, and he thinks the whole world order gets its identity, gets its existence through constant strife. Remember, he says Achilles was wrong to want strife to cease, because then the whole world order would have to cease to exist, since it depends on the strife. Yeah. So that's the significance of strife. And again, you can it is his example, the idea of a lyre, that produce, it's the tension, the strife of the strings that produces, music. And so he thinks tension kind of pervades a lot of things. We'll look at more of this, because we went through the allegory of the cave last time, but we'll do some. But next time, look at the four becauses. For us, causes are pretty much what Aristotle thought of as efficient causes. But, what makes a thing what it is? Well, Aristotle also thought that forms come into play to make a thing what it is. And also that things in nature tend toward certain forms or goals or purposes. Now this is something that post-Newton and post-Darwin we have gotten away from. But he thought part, for instance, of what explained how it is that an acorn changes into an oak tree is that everything aims at a particular purpose, or and that it's aiming at becoming something. So look at his four causes, but we may also have some time and go into a little bit of his ethics, But we'll do some review as well. If you have any questions about what we mean by some of the test pool questions, you can email me or ask me, come up. 1 through 6, just select one of them, okay? And write, roughly 1.5 to 3 pages is what I say. Type double space. So the length is it's that the 1 is on one line, the half is on the other, but I say roughly 1.5 to 3 pages. Okay, but we'll let you go and start your weekend a little early. Be sure to commune with the forms over the weekend. Like good philosophers. So we'll see you bright and early on Monday. And I don't think they're calling for any bad weather, but remember there's a bad weather line, or you can check on the website. So if you're wondering if we have anything going on. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can mention that to me. Monday. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, if anyone else came in after I called roll, let me know that you're here. Prove to me that you're here and that you exist. Folks, I had a question, just to repeat. When I say using my number, I mean if you're doing question 5, even though it's your first essay for the class, put a 5 on it because that's how I sort them out to grade them. I'll grade all the 5s together, essentially. So that's what I mean. Use so if you chose number 4, put 4 on your essay. That's what I mean by using my number. So, but I thought I'd repeat it, because if one person had the question, there might be other people who had the question but just didn't ask it. So, that's it.
Still integrity.
Pardon?
Still integrity.
You're right. I still do, don't I? I've got the whole thing. See, that's the problem.